In the previous video, we saw how externalities are a type of market failure by looking at the example of the conflict between banana producers and fishermen over the use of pesticides on the beautiful island of Guadeloupe. In this video, we will look at private solutions to the problem of externalities. Specifically, we will think about expanding the organization to internalize the externality, and we will think about bargaining and the so-called Coase theorem, as well as the problems associated with these solutions. The first type of private solution is internalizing the externality through expanding the scope of the organization. Think about a scenario where the same company owns both the banana plantations and the fisheries. What would they do? Looking at it graphically, they would face both the costs and the profits from both parts of their business, banana business, fishing business. And what they would do is they would trade off the profits from the banana business against the losses from the fisheries, from the pesticides. And they would incorporate all the costs basically and would choose a solution that is exactly the 38,000 ton production level. So if the same organization faces both the profits and all the costs from the activities, there would be no more external cost. The externality would have been internalized. And this can be a practical solution, especially if you think about sort of local problems with pollution. The idea is that you extend the ownership of the costs and benefits of the resource, if you want, to everyone who experiences costs and benefits. And this kind of reasoning is similar to the rationale for that we've seen for common pool resources and sort of including everyone in the regulation of the resource. So expansion of the scope of the organization to include both parts of the business here in this case. So internalizing the external cost would make the problem disappear because this private company or cooperative or whatever it is would choose the optimal level of banana production. There is another type of private solution to the problem of externalities. And this is bargaining, private bargaining, and what is sometimes called the Coase theorem. The basic idea is, even if there is no joint ownership of the two strands that are in conflict here, perhaps we can take our thought experiment where we thought about, okay, how much would the fishermen have to pay the plantation owners to stop doing it, and put it into practice. And for this, property rights are really important. So if it is not illegal to use pesticides, in other words, if there's a right to pollute for the plantation owners, who would have to be paying? Well, the fishermen would have to pay the plantation owners some money to produce less bananas, up to the point, as we know, of 38,000 tons. What if the property rights are different? What if the legal solution is different? Well, if there's a right to clean water, we could see the opposite. We could see the plantation owners going to the fishermen and compensating them and saying, like, look, we will pay you some money so that we can use some pesticides to produce bananas. Up to what point? Well, up to the 38,000 tons again. And that's the beauty of the Coase theorem. It lies in the realization that in both cases, property rights to the producers of bananas or property rights to the fishermen, you arrive at or can arrive at the same efficient, Pareto efficient outcome of 38,000 tons. But those of you who have actually read the paper know that there are problems. Of course, this doesn't take into account transaction costs and the difficulty of the fishermen getting together. But we'll see those problems later. So first, let's see how this actually would play out on the island of Guadeloupe. So how would this play out for the fishermen and the banana producers in Guadeloupe? Let's start with the status quo. Look at point A. Point A is the current level of output, the current level of bananas being produced per year. 80,000 tons. That's what happens if there's no bargaining, no agreement. Those of you who are following other international negotiations, it's BATNA, right? The best alternative to negotiated agreement. Okay, that's what happens if they can't agree. Okay, now we know that this is not the Pareto efficient outcome. So we know we can make people better off. So how? Well, think about the gain for the fishermen. So if we reduce the banana production level from 80,000 tons to 38,000 tons per year, we see a big gain to the fishermen, the green area here. But of course, reducing the output from 80,000 tons to 38,000 tons leads to a loss of profit for the plantation owners, shown in the blue area, loss of profit. So the fishermen gain a lot and the plantation owners lose some, but taken together, there is a net social gain. And this net social gain, the green area now, is basically the gain for the fishermen minus the loss for the plantation owners. And this net social gain is essentially the cake to be divided between the plantation owners and the fishermen. So for the banana producers, the minimum willingness to accept, so the minimum payment they would accept in these negotiations is equal to the blue area, equal to the loss of profit. And the maximum willingness to pay for the fishermen is the total area, so net social gain plus loss of profit, so all the gain to the fishermen. So how exactly do they split this pie? I don't know. It will depend on the bargaining process between the two sides. But no matter how exactly they split this pie, the fact that there's a pie to split at all means that there are Pareto efficiency gains, right? So they are able to reach the Pareto efficient outcome through bargaining. And we have moved from the market failure Pareto inefficient world of point A to the Pareto efficient level of banana production. Some of you will think, well, that's a bit unfair. Those fishermen, they get their livelihoods ruined and then they have to pay the plantation owners to stop it. And you'd be right. But we could think of an alternative legal situation where there's a right to clean water, so where the property rights are different. And in this scenario, the banana plantation owners would have to compensate the fishermen for the use of the pesticides. But the beauty of the Coase theorem, as I said before, lies in the realization that if you assign the property rights to the one side or you assign them to the other side, it doesn't matter for arriving at the Pareto efficient outcome, the Pareto efficient quantity. So no matter whether there's a right to clean water for the fishermen and the plantation owners have to compensate them, or whether there's a right to pollute and the fishermen have to bribe the plantation owners, in either case, there is the possibility to end up at the Pareto efficient allocation and the Pareto efficient quantity, which is 38,000 tons. And these are the sort of the two results of the Coase paper, right? So one, property rights, clearly assigned property rights, together with costless bargaining, lead to the optimal quantity, okay? And the second statement, the efficient quantity can be achieved without it depending on the initial assignment of property rights. So it doesn't matter whether there's a right to pollute or a right to clean water. You will, in either case, arrive at the efficient outcome. And that's a pretty cool result. But of course, it matters who pays the compensation. It has distributive consequences, as we say. Okay, so in one scenario, the banana plantation owners get paid and don't have to pay the fishermen, and in the other scenario, the fishermen have to pay off the plantation owners. So while it doesn't matter for the overall efficiency question, the property rights, of course, matter for distributive consequences. And if you read the Coase paper, you know that Ronald Coase knew this as well, and he knew that there were more problems, mainly in the form of transaction costs. What are transaction costs? Well, the whole process of bargaining and of creating a legal agreement and contract that is then enforceable, all of these, and verifying the true cost to the other side, etc. All these are, of course, transaction costs. And that is the reason why in practice this will not work in many cases. What are the problems and limitations that lead to the beautiful result of the Coase theorem and the bargaining to not work so well in practice? Well, first of all, we have to think about property rights. So property rights have to be clearly defined. If that's not the case, it's going to be very hard to find a bargain solution. So thinking about local air pollution or things like noise pollution, it's actually really hard to know what exactly is still allowed and what is not. The next problem concerns, of course, transaction costs. As Coase himself writes, the bargaining and the contracting and the legal representation are going to put costs on both sides. And these transaction costs are going to be higher the more complicated the problem is. Then we have the issue of collective action problems, and we already know those. In the example of the banana plantation owners and the fishermen, we could maybe think of a way to do this. Maybe the fishermen form a cooperative or a business association of fishermen, and they can then represent them, and sort of we have two sides at the bargaining table, at the negotiation table. But think about more, diffuse costs. Diffuse costs and concentrated benefits. That's always the problem, isn't it? Think about London residents wanting to reduce traffic. It's not easy to organize all London residents with the hope of a small a reduction in car use in London. So collective action problems loom large. There are some people and some features that also cannot be organized. Wildlife doesn't usually participate in bargaining. So it can be really hard or impossible to organize the people groups impacted by the external cost. Then there's the question of information and imperfect information. In the Guadeloupe example, we could think about sort of the lost revenue to the fishermen, and maybe that's a good approximation. But in reality, it's really hard to know these costs with certainty, especially if we think about sort of diffuse costs or things where the consequences are only known much later. So think about the effect on people in terms of asthma, or think about climate change. Some of these costs are really, really hard to calculate. And there's also the problem of incentives. So neither the banana plantation owner nor the fisherman in this case would have an incentive to reveal their true costs in the bargaining process. In other words, they would try to lie about how important these issues are to them. Then we also have the issue of limited funds. So while we can think about these sort of gains, potential gains to the fishermen and the costs that are imposed on them, of course, in practice, it may not be feasible for them to pay off the plantation owners because they don't have enough money. And they cannot borrow on international markets, financial markets, to pay off the banana plantation owners. This is one of the reasons there's generally the idea that if you assign property rights, you should make it so that the polluter pays. So the polluter pays principle is one of these ideas that come out of the Coasean bargaining sort of law and economics world. But this is, of course, still problematic. There's another problem. And this is known as the holdout problem. If the agreement of one party or many parties is necessary to go ahead with the investment decision, for example, or the construction of a new plant or something like that, then if all parties think like game theorists, some parties will be able to extract much, much more than the true cost they face. So if they own a house that stands on land that is supposed to be developed by the banana plantation owners, they will be able to extract large rents from the banana plantation owners in order to for the project to go ahead and to get paid for their house. And this is in a paper by Haenel and Shear in 2009 on sort of misinterpreting Coe's theorem. And this is also the fascinating storyline from Better Call Saul season 5, where there's this one guy that doesn't want to sell his house to Mesa Verde, and he's trying to extract all sorts of things, and basically then it only gets resolved with an even more absurd sort of rent extraction scheme. And what you can learn from this is basically that the sort of game theorists' view on the holdout problem and on Coasian bargaining is quite different from what Coase envisioned originally. And we see these types of problems in many situations. If you think about Heathrow expansion or any case where there's basically the opportunity for some people to hold out and to try to extract extra rents before a project can go ahead, for example. So, did the Coasian bargaining succeed between the fishermen and the plantation owners in Guadeloupe? No. You can read about the consequences in the ESPP book. But while, of course, the Coase theorem is a super elegant sort of private solution, as we have just seen, it will not work in many cases. So we have to look at public solutions. And that's what we do in the next video.